This week in the enterprise security news, CrowdStrike's Falcon has expanded its visibility to protect workloads across all environments. SentinelOne launches a container and cloud-native workload protection offering. ForcePoint's tech partnership with Amazon Web Services. Ping announces new workforce customer authentication solutions, that's a mouthful, for the modern digital enterprise, and a whole lot more. In our second segment, we've got two pre-recorded interviews from RSA 2020, Mike Nichols of Elastic and Todd Beardsley of Rapid7. They're both talking about election hacking. Two more pre-recorded interviews from RSA, Dan DeCloss of Plextrack and Corey Thune of Gravwell in the final segment. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome, everyone. This is Enterprise Security Weekly, episode number 174. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. It's March 4th, 2020, and here with me to talk about an onslaught of enterprise security news on the lines remotely is Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, 2 weeks of missed news. We got a lot to cover today.
Lots to cover. Mr. John Strand is here with us remotely as well. Welcome, John.
Make the travel stop, please. No, I'm just getting ready for Wild West Hackin' Fest.
Sweet.
We've got an amazing turnout still lined up with even with the COVID virus. So life is good.
You're smart because it's in San Diego, right?
I got to get someplace warm, dude.
Yeah, dude, that's awesome.
Got to get someplace warm. So.
And I like San Diego much better than San Francisco.
Oh, right.
Well, largely for the weather. 75 and sunny like every day, which is awesome.
Perfect.
Let's see. We do have some announcements, which now that I have my reading glasses on, I can't read. We are going to be at InfoSec World March 30th through April 1st. Matt and I are furiously putting together a curriculum for the Container Security Day. Very excited about that. I will be presenting there on container security stuff that I've learned, always learning about. It never ends with anything, especially containers. So I'll talk about how to get your legacy applications into containers and deploy them both locally and to the cloud. And we'll have lots of other things happening on that day, Matt. There's some panel discussions and a good mix of community talks and talks from some vendors as well.
Almost there. I've almost got it ready.
And I don't know which announcement was next. Is there another announcement for this segment, Johnny?
What?
Okay. We will be at Ocean and the Pell Center. Together, they're presenting the Cybersecurity Exchange Day on Wednesday, March 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Salve Regina University. Not Salve Regina. That's how Jeff says it. That's incorrect. It is Salve Regina University in beautiful Newport, Rhode Island. I've just looked at the agenda yesterday, and I'm super excited. A few folks that I used to work with when I worked for the university will be there presenting. One of them, Mark Dietrich, have forgot more about Linux than I think I'll ever know, who is now the actual director of IT at Brown University. Joe Pangborn works at the Naval Warfare Center. That's actually in Newport, Rhode Island. So just lots of people that I've worked with that are really super awesome are going to be presenting and participating in panel discussions. So, and Peter Smith from Edgewise will be there as well, which is awesome.
Jeez.
So come to Rhode Island, and it's going to be epic. We'll be there recording as well. So now the enterprise security news, even lots of stories. Now, John, I overheard you talking just before the show that there was a part. I'll let you say it in case I get it wrong.
Are you talking about CrowdStrike?
Yes.
Yeah, CrowdStrike was acquired by Help Systems. It's going to be under their core security umbrella. Of course, they're good friends from way back, the core security group, Core Impact and Insight. So it looks like Mudge has sold CrowdStrike to them. And we were talking about it just before the show, and it's going to be interesting because how exactly does CrowdStrike play with something like Insight or Impact will yet to be seen. But to be blunt, I haven't seen Core Impact or Insight being used in customer networks or by pen testers for maybe a decade now, whereas CrowdStrike is used absolutely everywhere by everybody.
Right.
So that'll be interesting, especially if you're in that kind of pen testing tool market as a company or as a pen tester. This could have impacts because if you're using CrowdStrike, you know that CrowdStrike is ridiculously inexpensive. It's like $2,500 per year, and it's an amazing tool. So I know our own team is very nervous about what's going to happen to the overall price of the product moving forward.
But the two products are very different technologies. Impact is still a Windows product, which I have seen pen test teams using it. Core Impact Core Security underwent a lot of acquisitions, changes. So they are marketing and selling Core Impact to penetration testing teams, especially internal red teams for junior members. And CrowdStrike, but completely different technology, right? Is it written in like Python or Ruby or something like that?
It is, but let's back up and let's see what the goal and objective is, right? You're creating a tool, or you have a tool that is specifically designed to exploit vulnerabilities and do things like lateral movement and enumerate vulnerabilities. And CrowdStrike does that, and Impact does that. And Insight is all about doing that in a more automated enterprise level fashion. So you're right, Core Impact runs on Windows and CrowdStrike runs on a number of different platforms. But the overall point is you have two products that are both doing the same thing. You have an implant, you have an agent, you have malware, you have the ability to deploy that malware in a variety of different ways, and then you have a number of ways to actually enumerate the vulnerabilities in an organization. So let's just back up and say, as far as goals and objectives of the tools, you're probably looking at like 80% overlap between both those tools.
Yeah, I would agree. Very interesting. Let's see. There was another acquisition before we get to the other articles.
Yeah. Thoma Bravo acquired Sophos. Now, this is slightly older news. This was announced a while back. I think they just finished the acquisition. It was kind of delayed a little bit. But Thoma Bravo, again, private equity firm, have bought up a number of security products over the past year and a half. Now they acquire an endpoint solution in Sophos, $3.9 billion US. So pretty good premium over where they were trading in the market.
Interesting. All right, now on to the news. Where do you guys want to start?
Let's just start at the top, man. Work our way down.
Nozomi Networks improves reliability across IT and OT and IoT networking environments. I'm not sure how all three of those are really truly separate things. Of course, IT and OT, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this company really focused on OT and I guess IoT, right? The kind of the industrial side of the fence, the SCADA stuff. What I don't understand is what do they do on the IT side? I mean, they're known for their OT and really the industrial control system side. So where does IT fall in this mix? So I haven't figured out this IT component yet. I believe they were partnering at one time with IBM. I don't know if they still are or not. And maybe that's where some of this additional IT capability comes in. But I don't see them as a traditional IT network play.
Yeah, well, I mean, OT contains a lot of IT technologies. I mean, most of the HMIs and historians run on Windows that you'll find in a traditional OT shop. And I think a lot of traditional security firms that are trying to target OT are all, trying to talk about, like you said, Matt, the SCADA devices, but that's merely just one component. In a lot of attacks that we've seen, the attackers go after the Windows systems as well as the OT or IoT devices that are used for OT. I don't know how you say that. You could say SCADA devices, I suppose.
Right.
What are they ingesting?
But I see that as the management
do they have their
system.
own sensors that they drop, or are they ingesting Brozeek like literally everybody else?
Oh, I'm not sure what their underlying technology is.
Yeah, because that would, I don't know, maybe we can get somebody to come on the show and talk about it. But that is something that's very, very, very interesting to me whenever I'm looking at these products is what are they actually ingesting? And the reason why is if you have a product that's actually just involved with NetFlow, that creates all kinds of different problems with the level of visibility that you get in the data. Same thing from a limited extent. If you're implementing Zeek data,
Yep.
like
You get a little more
Vectra AI does Zeek, but they actually modify the field names. But no, I'd love to know what they're actually doing under the hood. It would be interesting.
Yeah, they have their own appliances, but I don't know what's running those appliances, right? Because they talk about their new high-performance appliances. And they are definitely doing a lot of network analysis to understand what's on these networks because you're not going to actively scan them.
Right?
Yeah.
Yep. They have to.
It's interesting. Code 42 is basically calling themselves the leader in insider threat detection, investigation, and response.
So stop and think about that for a second. Does that make sense to anybody who knows Code 42?
I mean, they're a backup provider, right?
Not really.
Exactly right.
I mean, we use them for backups for our systems. There was controversy a few years ago when they basically kind of abandoned their consumer product to focus on the enterprise. And now it looks like they're moving into data security and insider threat off of a backup, which, I mean, maybe.
But they're known for backup and recovery, right? And they're not known for insider threat.
Right.
It's a little stretch.
Yeah, I'm going to go with I've never once had this product get in our way, ever once come up as an issue. We've seen them as far as backups, as far as gaining access to backup servers.
Right.
But as far as like insider threat, no, nothing. And that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that they're clearly pivoting to something new.
Right. Which is interesting.
Yep.
CrowdStrike's Falcon expanded visibility protects workloads across all environments.
What the hell?
I don't know what does that mean?
Like what's difference here? Like what's changing? Is it the cloud? Is that where they're talking about?
Running in containers? Do they have a container agent now?
They do. They've had a container
AWS.
agent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they've had one for a while using their. I believe it's just leveraging their kernel infrastructure, their kernel agent. But it says the expansion of Falcon discovered to provide valuable insights into GCP and Azure workloads. I don't know how they do it, but that's one of the parts of the announcement. And then advanced EDR and runtime protection for container workloads, which I thought they had already announced and was already doing before.
But sometimes they take these and they repackage them for something like RSA.
Yeah.
Just so it may not be completely new, but it's kind of a repackaging of stuff that we already know. But one of the things I love about CrowdStrike and Cylance and a lot of these different companies that are coming up, Endgame especially as well, is the fact that they don't seem to be treating like the endpoint and the security agent market is like a cash cow that just needs to be milked. And honestly, moving into the cloud and developing things like this, I can't speak to how effective these are, but at the same time, the fact that they're actually thinking about it is very forward-leaning, and I really, really hope to see some really cool things in pen tests over the next few years, seeing it being used.
What's interesting is they say they're providing visibility into specific workloads hosted on Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure, and I'm assuming also AWS, and they're providing EDR, which assumes that I have an endpoint, and runtime protection for containers. They're also assuming I have a container. How do I protect, a Lambda function or my AWS services that have replaced my application? For example, we're going to use Amplify to run React, even though I built containers to run React. But why do I need to maintain those containers when Amazon can run my application directly?
Yeah,
but then I can't do any kind of EDR, right?
Yeah, right. Because you don't have the endpoint visibility. One of the questions, I got a lot of questions about CrowdStrike and their vulnerability management product, which, it's kind of been swept under the covers a little bit. But people are like, how real is this? And I'm like, it's pretty real. I mean, if you think about what an endpoint agent can do when it has accurate inventory of the hardware and the software to infer what vulnerabilities and missing patches are there,
Right.
there is part of a story there, right? And we've talked about it before. So I got a lot of questions last week about how real is that product. People are trying to figure it out because they're trying to figure out how it does or doesn't compete directly with the core VM vendors. But you don't see a lot of news around that component, which is kind of weird.
Which is interesting. Yeah. I think it's totally doable, though. I mean, if you've already got an agent on there, and like Matt said, you're already taking an inventory to do EDR, I don't think it's really that much security research to go, we can tell you what patches are missing, right? I mean, you got to build a database, but I'd imagine that today, to get started on that, I mean, CrowdStrike's a public company now, right? You get a research team, maybe make a partnership or two, and you're off to the races, right? And now you're competing with the major VM vendors, and you've got an advantage because you're already on the endpoint. I don't have to put another agent on there.
Yeah, and the database already exists. It's called the NVD. It's the National Vulnerability Database. It's a quick cross-reference and then maybe some additional add-ons, but the base of it's already there.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. In a VM, Qualys is getting ready to maybe put into production vulnerability management solution.
Yeah, this came out of their QSC, the Qualys Security Conference. So they ran their own dedicated day on Tuesday last week at RSA Conference at the Four Seasons.
That's right, because they weren't exhibiting. They just basically did their own thing, which actually I think is pretty smart.
Yeah, they did their own thing. They knew everybody was going to be in town. They took Tuesday and invited a bunch of their customers over and had their own kind of security conference. But at that, and they kind of pre-announced this, but they talked about it at the event last week, was the VMDR, the Vulnerability Management Detection and Response, right? They're starting to move in this kind of response side of the equation. I think a lot to probably catch up with Rapid7 in some respects, because Rapid7's made a lot of key investments in detection and response with log entries and command, et cetera. I think that puts some pressure on Qualys. You're seeing them try to introduce something similar. Says it's going to be available in mid-March, so we'll see kind of what this looks like once it actually gets announced or released, but it was announced last week.
Yeah, John, I'm curious what you see with your customers. Now that we have a lot more options about what we put on our endpoints for vulnerability management and detection, response, and even prevention, is it just all over the place, or are we starting to see some consolidation?
Well, it's really coalescing around three major vendors, right? Like Cylance, CrowdStrike, and Carbon Black. And we see a lot of churn where people are basically ripping one and replacing with another, and basically realizing that it's pretty much running the same way. And I know all three of those vendors would have words with me on saying that. But the big thing that I would like to say on the endpoint, though, is we are now seeing other vendors like Endgame, as an example, starting to pop up a lot more, which is interesting. I don't know quite what to make of that, but that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
With Elastic, we were talking about how they've integrated with Endgame, right? Basically merged, and now they have this coverage in Paul's enchanting quadrants, right? Where you can get some network telemetry, right, through their beats and things like that. You now, since the Endgame merger or acquisition, right, now you have endpoint protection, detection, and response. And now you've got a logging solution. Where I think the market is going is companies are going to basically cover all three of those, quadrants, and that's going to be the solutions that we're looking at. But you also said something very interesting, John. When we were actually able to spend time, it was nice. We went on multiple dates and stuff. It was awesome. But you were saying that if you have just a logging solution, what you can get with just that. Like, do you really need a detection and response?
Well,
because there's the
specifically a logging solution ingesting sysmon data.
Yeah.
Now, sysmon doesn't capture absolutely everything, especially whenever you're looking at domain level attacks. You're still going to need a lot of traditional event logs, and you can bring somebody like Mick Douglas on or to talk more about what sysmon would actually.
Yeah, he's scheduled to come. He's scheduled to come on Paul Security Weekly.
And he could talk about it, but if you step back and you look at what sysmon is doing, sysmon has the ability of logging every network connection and executable. It has the ability of logging every single process execution in the hash. It has and who started these various things. And it's basically giving us the level of logging and fidelity that we always wanted in our event logs, but we never had.
Right.
So the question becomes, if you're an EDR, right, and you're developing a product and you're writing an agent that hooks into that operating system, and it's monitoring the Windows operating system for those types of things like file reads, process execution, network connection. The question is, why the hell are you doing that? If Microsoft's doing it, it's already for free. It's something that you can ride right on top of, and you can start doing detext on top of it. All of a sudden now you have a really good endpoint security solution. And there'll be people that come out and say, well, you can always bypass sysmon with these different techniques. That's true, but the important thing to remember is that's true for absolutely everything. Damn one of these vendors.
Yeah.
So now if I'm an investor, and I know we have a lot of investors reading on this, why would you be investing in a company that's spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on an agent whenever Microsoft's released that for free and you can write on top of it?
It's interesting to see the strategy. Could you run Windows Defender with sysmon and some kind of SIM or logging and event correlation system that's bringing all that together?
And in fact, we're going to be releasing an open source product. I think we're going to call it SCYTHE, but some people don't like the name on our team. But specifically what it does is it's a series of rules and kind of showing what you can do with Elk Stack with just Event ID 3, which is the network connections coming off of sysmon. So we can say, okay, with Event ID 3, what's the most used network connections, the executables we see the most? What are the executables we see the least? What are the internal network connections? Who's making the most internal connections and so on? And that's just a proof of concept, kind of like Helk from the Spectre Ops team or Cyber War Dog. Actually, I think he moved over to Microsoft. I think Cyber War Dog moved over to Microsoft. But the same concept, but there's so many of these projects out there that are doing so many cool things with Elk that, with Endgame and Elastic kind of merging together, that's a hell of a good move moving forward in the future.
Right. Agreed. Let's see what else we got. Oh, SCYTHE has announced their marketplace.
I was there. That was pretty awesome. I think we were at the DNA Club in San Francisco. It was pretty cool. A bunch of people were there from a whole bunch of different companies. But yeah, the idea of the marketplace is if you're a SCYTHE customer, you can actually start writing plugins and different modules to extend the capabilities of what SCYTHE can do, and then you can sell them or give them away on the marketplace. So that was just kind of neat to see that kind of collaboration coming to that platform. And I really think it's going to help accelerate SCYTHE and as far as what it can do and getting a lot of cool things that maybe you didn't quite think of, but somebody else did. And you're like, that's neat. Now I can incorporate it.
Yes. And it saves you time to write them yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
that's pretty cool. I did add this article on Palo Alto Cortex, although I still don't fully understand it.
Okay.
I think I figured it out. I want them on to clarify, but I think I partially figured this out. I think Cortex is a lot of it's like SecDo in some of the acquisitions, Demisto, et cetera, is Cortex. And so XOR is the Demisto acquisition, I believe, from a SOAR perspective. I believe Prism is what they call all the application container security products that they bought. So this would be Twistlock, PureSec, Redlock, et cetera, I think went over to Prism. I think that's what they did. That's the best I could figure out last week. But I'd love the Palo Alto folks to pick up the phone or send an email because we'd love to understand. Because I tell you, financial analysts have no idea what Prism and Cortex are. But I think that's what they are.
Interesting.
Well, and I also like the idea that they're going with XSOAR instead of SOAR NG. So that's neat.
Yeah, that's kind of a neat. There was a lot of other acquisitions that we don't quite know what products they got rolled up into, if they're part of Cortex, if they're different modules within Cortex. It's very difficult to know what's going on there.
Exactly right.
Gurucul has unveiled a cloud-native unified security and risk analytics platform.
So UEBA's dead, so you rename it.
Okay, is it dead? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Well, no. I think a lot. I've seen it get integrated more into the SIM vendors, and there's really not the standalone kind of market anymore.
It's a feature. It's not.
Yeah, it's a feature, right? And so if you're them and all you do is UEBA, you got to kind of reinvent yourself because so many other people are integrating it into their SIM.
So it says it applies security analytics to use cases handled by SIM, UEBA, network traffic analysis, SOAR, cloud security, and threat hunting into one consolidated platform that, according to them, allows you to detect both known and unknown threats in real time, identify risky user entity behaviors, and automatically respond to security incidents. So this is like, I got to buy a whole bunch of stuff and then by this,
integrate it all
together.
But dude, you buy it all, you integrate it. It sounds like everything works and security's solved.
Yeah, because that always happens. SentinelOne has launched a container and cloud native workload protection. That seems to be a theme, cloud native workload protection, which again still sounds like it's based on that I have something to put an agent on, because SentinelOne is an endpoint company, right?
Yep, exactly. So, John, I'm curious. I had some interesting conversations about SentinelOne last week because I'm like, really, they just took like $200 million right before RSA conference. And I think they're up to like 800 million invested, right? So I was really trying to figure out, a lot of money. I'm like, so what's the play, right? I mean, you got to go public, right? But I'm like, how does a SentinelOne compete with the Cylance, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike side? Here's what I heard, and this is where I want your take is. SentinelOne makes it really, really easy to do EDR, but do you see these guys in the enterprise or not?
No, not as much as some of the other ones. And I also take issue with easy EDR. So look, whenever you're looking at EDR, I want you to think of a seesaw, right? And on one side, you'll have something like Carbon Black that has tons and tons and tons of bells and whistles and little things you can configure and little ways that you can whitelist certain scripts. And it's all of this complexity. And then on the other side, you have the quote unquote easy EDRs. So SentinelOne makes it easy. The problem with that is the more that you make it easy for the end user, the more you abstract things from the user, the level of detection and the capabilities that you're going to provide are going to inherently go down, simply because whenever you're tuning your product to sell to a customer, you're going to lean away from false positives. And inevitably, as you start moving away from false positives, you start getting into the land of false negatives. So anytime you talk about anybody, especially in the realm of EDR, talking about how their product is super simple and life is great and everything's wonderful, don't believe it. And ultimately, your organization has to make a decision. If you want that and you want to have the higher probability of some false negatives coming through, then perfect. Make that decision, and there's logical reasons for it. If you really like the bells and whistles, buttons and knobs and all the configuration of something that you get with a Carbon Black, great, that's awesome. But you have to make that decision, and there's pros and cons on either side. And if any vendor says we make it easy and we're completely effective and it makes security simple, everybody that's listening to the show knows that entire statement set is garbage. So it sounds like I'm ripping on SentinelOne, and I don't want it to come across that way. But universally, almost every single product vendor that we see that makes things quote unquote easy, that means that they're reducing the false positives, which ultimately increases the false negatives and the ability to get around these products. I am also fairly certain that SentinelOne has the capability of put the screws to their configurations and lock it down. But once again, is that what people are actually buying? Whenever you're a CISO trying to buy a product, you're trying to buy quick, easy, implemented. A junior analyst can run it and life's good. But the reality of the situation tends to be a lot more messy.
That was a great summary.
Sorry. That's why I asked him. No, because I mean, he sees this stuff in the field way more than we do, right? And the question is, does that story resonate? Do we see it in the enterprises? I think it's really hard for a SentinelOne to differentiate itself in a pretty crowded market with Cylance and Carbon Black and CrowdStrike and even the end game to Elastic acquisition. It's really hard to differentiate yourself in this endpoint space. And if your differentiation is we make it easy, but then again, I can get around you or you can't give me the detections. Is that really a good storyline?
Yeah, it just makes it hard. I mean, it kind of, Paul, if you remember about 10 years ago, the antivirus engines were doing a lot of the same thing. They would have the capability of stopping
Right.
things from executing with the name SVC host, but you had to turn that on way deep in the innards. So they had a lot of capabilities, but a lot of that crap is off by default.
Yep. To make things work.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I really liked SCYTHE. We did an interview.
You got really excited with them. You said that you wanted to talk to me about them. So yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So it's basically, what did they call it? There was a name that
Shadow risk elimination is what they call it.
is what they call it, but it falls in
Ooh.
the overarching category of like threat enumeration, or what do they call that?
Digital risk is where I've seen the market, right? It's these folks looking for that exterior digital footprint of organizations and trying to understand what that external risk footprint looks like. But how they do it and some of the artifacts that they collect are pretty unique compared to what we've seen from some of the other vendors in this space.
Attack surface mapping is the term that I like.
Ah.
Yeah. See, John's like, oh, now the light bulb goes off. Like, basically, and there's multiple companies that are doing it, likely all slightly different. But one of the schools of thought is basically you scan the entire internet and you take a snapshot of the internet. You store that on some really big honking servers, and then you can query your local copy of the internet and pull out all of the information you can find about my organization from the internet. So you're looking at SSL certificate chains and a term in there that I forget, where we do some kind of open source intelligence gathering from SSL certificates. You're looking at images, and I thought SCYTHE had a great way to look at images. Because I was like, so it sounds like it's kind of like TinEye, right? Like you take my logo and then you see where my logo might show up everywhere on the internet. He's like, yeah, well, TinEye's like 10-year-old technology. We do it way better than that. There's a lot more advanced kind of searching and querying. Natural language processing was the term that he used to describe how they're basically scouring the internet for all of the little kind of trail of bits that you're leaving behind on the internet to basically enumerate infrastructure or assets of any kind that you don't know about, right? That may be compromised already that you don't know about, which I think, to me, if I'm a CISO anywhere, I have this somewhere. I'm buying this from someone, right? Because I could do it internally, but it's a lot of work. And I'm not sure what the pricing structure is for a lot of these vendors, but like, I want that. Like, tell me what I missed, right?
Well, let me kind of talk a little bit, because I did research them after you got excited. So if it was just that asset mapping, basically what they're doing is they're automating the recon phase of a pen test. And I'm not interested in that. I honestly don't care. I can run recon ng, get a lot of the exact same data, use Shodan, Census, whatever. I don't care. And a lot of these products, they actually stand up, really nice front ends for the crap that a pen tester sees in the first day of a pen test. That wasn't interesting. What was interesting to me was the attack simulator. And the reason why I liked the attack simulator is it went beyond the standard, you're missing patches. It got into, if they find authentication portals as part of that, they'll actually do authentication testing against those different services. And they will look for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and things like that. But I liked the way that they actually approached that type of testing. It read more like a true vulnerability assessment than just running a scanner against the outside of an environment. So I think that correlation between the assets that are discovered from the recon phase, coupling that with real world first step attacks that we do in every single pen test, that was cool. Because if they can automate a tremendous portion of that and take that off the table for me as a pen tester, that's tremendous value, especially with, did you guys see at RSA that the FBI released a report about authentication attacks against OA and how that's proliferating and people needed to be worried about it. That's something we've been using for a long time. And to have a platform like this that can actually do that and automate it and couple it with a recon, that's awesome, especially for larger organizations.
And that's what Rob Gurzeev, the CEO and co-founder, told us was his differentiator, was that he actually is doing some attack simulation coupled with all of that data together. And I believe him because his background is he was in the So what does he say? He was in basically Israel's 8200 group.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was in Unity.
So
Well,
I mean, that carries some
course he-
clout in my mind.
Well, and also it's kind of weird. There's this butt sniffing that goes on whenever you're reading the crap that people put on their websites, that they actually use phrases and terminology and words, and they talk about actual attack vectors that real attackers are actually using.
Yeah.
And with everything that I'm reading about what they're doing, this is clearly a company that at this phase gets it, and that's really cool.
Yes, agreed. BSW 164 is where you can find that interview. Thank you, Johnny.
That's fast.
So, anything else? What else is interesting in here that we haven't covered yet?
Well, the Centrify, the one from Centrify, right? Because this is where I think the space was going to go, right? So Centrify debuts identity-centric privilege access management. Because privilege access management is part of broader identity and access management. It's not necessarily its own separate market. And so now what you're starting to see is some of the identity and access management vendors start to add privilege access into their portfolio. I think this is a really smart move because why have two different solutions when this should all be integrated into your central identity and access management
I completely agree, Matt. I never truly understood the difference. I mean, I understand there's privileged users and not privileged users, but every user has some level of privilege, right? So in that case, every user is a privileged user, in my opinion.
So why have a separate solution to manage all your privileged users
in one place
when they're also normal users on your network as well? So now I have two systems to manage a bunch of users? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Anything else in there? There's other stories in there. They're not as interesting.
Some of them, yeah. I think we hit all the interesting ones. I know there's somebody that's in our show notes. They're like, please talk about me. But
Right. Agreed. So, John and or Matt, did you guys see anything at RSA that got you excited?
Not this year. Not for me. Matt?
No, we kind of
I think we
talked about
this
a little bit, but yeah.
It's weird. It seems like every year there's a buzzword du jour, right? IoT or artificial intelligence or security orchestration. This year just felt like all those buzzwords were all intermixed and it was just static. I didn't see anything new that popped out that was like, oh, holy hell, this is like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So that was kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I saw some cool stuff on the application security side. There was one company that I talked to, that name escapes me, that were doing like the fuzzing your code in like the unit testing kind of phase. And the result of that, BuzzFuzz, you get unit tests to run QA, but you also get security tests that find potential security problems. And they're doing that like basically in like the unit testing phase, which I've always been excited about doing that security in that phase of your application lifecycle. I thought that the kind of isolation and containerization of applications on Windows is promising. It's nothing new. I mean, Bromium's been doing it for a long time. I think there's lots of there's some new players in that market, and people kind of slicing and dicing that a little better, in my opinion. Some newer, better technologies out there, including some from Microsoft, which I think is interesting. We're going to pull some people from Microsoft to come on the show and talk about them, because I think there's some operating system stuff built in that lets you, in container in this case is not Docker container, it's basically application isolation like Bromium has done, using better technology, smaller, faster technologies on Windows, which I think, John, based on our conversations of, if I can collect sysmon and some Windows event logs and Windows Defender, can I then just use some application isolation and be in a better place security-wise, right? Because I think isolation is a great idea. I don't know how much you've seen that on your test, John.
Not very much. Not very much at all. But this is a whole area that I think is very new. And it's I think it's the only cool place in security right now. I mean, there's pen testing and breaking into things. I think that's always interesting as a complexity problem, and the fact that we have lots of legacy technologies. But when you're talking about containers and you're talking about virtualization in the cloud and things like that, I think that's really the only super interesting thing that's going on, is that new stuff that's kind of on that bleeding edge, because that's the crap we're going to have to deal with for the next 10 years.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Well, thank you both, and thank you everyone for listening and watching. Stay tuned. Some interviews from RSA are coming up next in the next 2 segments, so stay tuned.